Mark Jenkins came home from a long shift only to be accused of stealing a brand new car sitting in his own driveway. The accusation came from Karen Miller, the overbearing HOA head who had always tried to control and humiliate him in front of the neighborhood. But this time, fate had a twist ready, one that would expose her lies and turn the tables completely. Just wait until you hear how this shocking confrontation ended and why justice, at last, had the final word. Mark Jenkins had just wrapped up another exhausting shift at the fire station. His body ached, his shirt still smelled faintly of smoke, and all he wanted was a quiet evening at home with nothing more dramatic than reheating leftovers. He pulled into his driveway, sighed with relief, and then froze. There, parked just a few feet from his garage, was a shiny black Ford Explorer. The car looked so new it could have rolled straight out of a dealership. The chrome gleamed under the fading afternoon sun, and the headlights seemed to glare back at him like watchful eyes. Mark rubbed his temples, confused. Had one of the neighbors parked here by mistake? That seemed unlikely. His driveway wasn't a public space. It was clearly part of his property. And besides, everyone in the neighborhood knew how particular the HOA was about parking rules. Before he could even take a step closer to inspect the car, a sharp voice cut through the quiet like broken glass. "That's my brand new car. You stole it and parked it here." Karen Miller, head of the HOA and self-proclaimed neighborhood watchdog, came charging across the lawn with the energy of someone who lived for moments like this. Her face was flushed, her hands flailed dramatically, and her tone was so loud that half the street could hear her accusation. Mark blinked, stunned. For a moment, he honestly wondered if he'd misheard her. Stole it? He hadn't even touched the thing. He had literally just pulled into his driveway after work. But Karen wasn't slowing down. She jabbed her finger at the SUV as if pointing out a villain in a crime show. Her eyes narrowed on Mark, and there was a strange kind of triumph in her expression, as though she'd been waiting for an opportunity to corner him, and this mysterious vehicle had landed in her lap like a gift. "Don't try to play innocent," she spat. "I just bought this yesterday, and now here it is, parked at your house. Care to explain that?" Mark's jaw dropped. He had never stolen so much as a lawn ornament in his life. He was the guy who showed up to rescue cats from trees, for heaven's sake. And now, in the middle of his own driveway, he was being accused of grand theft auto by the very neighbor who already made his life miserable with constant HOA complaints. The absurdity of it all might have been funny if it weren't so humiliating. Already, heads began popping out from behind curtains. Porch doors creaked open. Neighbors leaned over railings, phones in hand, pretending to check their messages, while clearly eavesdropping on every word. To them, this was free entertainment. Another episode in the ongoing saga of Karen versus the neighborhood. Mark could feel the weight of every set of eyes on him. His ears burned with embarrassment. He wanted to shout that this was insane, that he hadn't done anything wrong, but the words stuck in his throat. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. One thing was certain, this was no ordinary misunderstanding. This was the start of something that was about to spiral, and fast. If there was one constant in Mark Jenkins's life on Maplewood Drive, it was Karen Miller's hostility. She wasn't just a neighbor. She was a one-woman HOA army, always on patrol, always looking for the smallest reason to lecture, fine, or humiliate. Mark remembered the first time she'd come after him. A heated note taped to his mailbox because it was an inch too tall. Then came the complaints about his grass being unprofessional when it was barely an inch longer than the guideline. She even knocked on his door once at 9 o'clock at night just to scold him that his dog barked 2 minutes too long. It had gotten to the point where Mark avoided crossing paths with her at all. He'd time his trash runs so she wouldn't be outside, or park at the far end of the lot just to skip the confrontation. But despite all of that, nothing had prepared him for this. Here she was now, standing bold in his driveway, finger pointed like a prosecutor, accusing him of a crime that could ruin his reputation in seconds. Her voice dripped with smug satisfaction as she pulled out her phone and dialed 3 simple numbers. "Yes, I have a stolen car in my driveway," she announced to the dispatcher, as if reading lines off a stage script. "This man took it." The sheer confidence in her tone made Mark's stomach churn. She wasn't just accusing him, she was relishing it. He could see it in her eyes. This was the moment she had been waiting for. All those petty battles over lawns and dogs had been practice runs for this final showdown, where she could paint him as the neighborhood villain. Mark's chest tightened, his heartbeat quickening. He'd spent his career charging into burning buildings, staying calm under pressure while flames roared around him. But standing here being falsely accused in his own driveway, surrounded by curious neighbors peeking from behind blinds and porch rails, that was a different kind of fire, one that burned with humiliation. He tried to speak, to tell Karen to stop, but she raised her palm toward him as if to silence him, lips curled into a triumphant smirk. To her, he wasn't even a neighbor anymore. He was a trophy. A scapegoat, proof to the entire street that Karen Miller was right all along. Mark glanced around and saw phones raised, neighbors whispering, recording bits and pieces like they were live reporting breaking news. Not one of them stepped forward to intervene. No one said, "That doesn't sound like Mark." The silence of his own community was deafening. He clenched his jaw, his fists tightening at his sides. He knew exactly what would happen next. A patrol car would arrive, see an HOA president pointing the finger, and suddenly he would be the one in cuffs. All because Karen had decided to turn her obsession with control into a public spectacle. The bitter truth sank in. This wasn't just about a car anymore. This was about power. And Karen was savoring every second of it. Red and blue lights sliced across the quiet street as a patrol car pulled up to the curb. Neighbors who had been lurking in shadows now leaned forward with renewed interest, like spectators at a courtroom drama. Mark's driveway had become the stage, and the officers were about to play judge and jury. Karen wasted no time. She stormed forward, her voice already raised before the officers even shut their doors. "This man stole my vehicle!" she shrieked, jabbing her finger toward Mark like she'd just uncovered a fugitive. "I bought it yesterday. I have papers right here." She thrust a folder into the air with theatrical flair, waving it as if it were the final word on the matter. Mark stood his ground, jaw tight. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to shout, to defend himself against the absurdity of it all. But deep down, he knew the trap. The louder he got, the guiltier he'd look. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, almost too steady. "Officers," he said, forcing calm into each word. "That car was here when I got home. I've never touched it. If it's hers, check the VIN." Inside, though, a storm raged. His fists clenched so tightly, his knuckles turned pale. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. He had charged into burning buildings with smoke filling his lungs and fire licking at his skin, but he had never felt heat like this, the heat of helplessness. One of the officers, a tall man with a clipboard tucked under his arm, nodded and stepped toward the black Ford Explorer. He leaned down, peering through the windshield to read the vehicle identification number etched into the glass. The second officer remained by Karen, taking notes as she rattled on, describing in excessive detail how she had just purchased the car and how she saw Mark suspiciously near it. Mark caught the glint in her eye. She wasn't just reporting facts, she was performing. Every word was calculated for effect. Every gesture designed to hammer home the image of a righteous woman standing up against a so-called criminal. And the neighbors. They watched with wide-eyed fascination, whispering among themselves, cell phones still raised. To them, Mark wasn't the firefighter who had once pulled a boy from a house fire down the street. He wasn't the neighbor who shoveled sidewalks in winter. In this moment, he was just the man in the spotlight, accused and silent. The longer he stood there, the more the fury bubbled in his chest. He imagined shouting the truth, ripping Karen's claims apart word by word. He imagined slamming his hand on the hood of the car, demanding someone believe him. But he swallowed the anger down like fire, knowing one wrong move would turn suspicion into certainty. Finally, the officer straightened up from the windshield, pen scratching on his notepad. The silence was unbearable. Mark's pulse thundered in his ears. His entire body coiled like a spring. Whatever came out of the officer's mouth next could decide everything, and Karen knew it. She folded her arms, smirk curling on her lips, certain that victory was already hers. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The tall officer pressed a button on his radio, murmuring details into the mic clipped to his shoulder. Static crackled back, a faint voice answering with information no one else could hear. Mark's fists were still clenched, but his eyes stayed fixed on the officer's face, searching for any sign of what was about to happen. Finally, the officer looked up. His gaze shifted from the car to Karen, and then, unmistakably, a smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but firm, "this vehicle is reported stolen. It's registered to a man in another state." The words hit like a thunderclap. Karen's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. She froze mid-breath, as if someone had turned her into stone. Around them, the small crowd of neighbors let out a collective gasp, whispers spreading like wildfire. Phones tilted upward, recording every second of this downfall. Mark felt his chest loosen, the crushing weight of suspicion lifting in an instant. Relief washed over him like cool water after walking through fire. For the first time that night, his lips curved into a smile. Not wide, not boastful, but small and sharp. The kind of smile that says, "Justice has arrived." Karen stumbled to find her voice. That can't be right," she stammered, shoving her so-called paperwork toward the officer again. Her words tripped over each other, thin and desperate. I just bought it yesterday. Look at these papers. They're real." But the officer didn't even glance at them. He'd already seen enough. The folder sagged in her hand, suddenly weightless and meaningless. Those documents were nothing but lies, flimsy props in her theater of deceit. The second officer stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Ma'am, you're under arrest," he said simply. His tone carried no anger, no satisfaction, just the cold certainty of the law at work. Gasps turned into murmurs. Some neighbors shook their heads. Others raised their brows, and a few even exchanged quiet chuckles. The woman who had once lorded over every detail of their lawns and fences was now the one caught in a net of her own making. As Karen's wrists clicked into the cuffs, she twisted toward Mark, eyes flashing with disbelief, as if he were somehow to blame for her collapse. But Mark didn't say a word. He didn't need to. One of the officers caught his eye. and, in a rare break from protocol, gave him a quick wink. "Looks like you're not just saving houses from fire, sir," he said. "You're saving your street from thieves." Mark let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The tension in his shoulders melted, and for the first time all evening, the night air felt cool and calm. The spotlight had shifted, and the truth had spoken louder than Karen's screams ever could. As the patrol car doors shut and the engine rumbled, Mark stood a little taller. He wasn't the man accused anymore. He was the man vindicated. And as neighbors drifted back inside, still buzzing with the story they'd tell tomorrow, he realized something. Sometimes the best response to a scream is silence, because silence gives the truth the stage, and the truth always knows how to make an entrance.